All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations with Catholics, kind of. This is going to be a different episode because today I am joined by CJ. CJ is not a Catholic. I'm also kind of not a Catholic. So, who's the Catholic that we're having the conversation with? Well, CJ isn't really going to be talking to Kevin per se. CJ is going to be talking to Kevin GPT, a very advanced AI that's just going to be CJ's sounding board. CJ thinks that he has some pretty solid reasons for why the Bible might have some verses that disprove the Catholic Church, but I'm gonna let CJ get there. Maybe CJ, real quick before we just dive into things, do you want to just give maybe like a 2 minute overview on who you are, what your current kind of religious worldview is, and any kind of pertinent facts we should know?
Yeah. So Christopher Rice, and it's a pleasure to meet you face to face, Kevin. I love your show. I love your channel. I learn a lot from it, especially from the philosophical side and from where you're coming from, which is fascinating. And I love that you're willing to challenge yourself, you know. So I want to do the same for myself. And so I recognize that in someone else, and I love seeing that process.
Thanks, CJ. That means a lot to me. I do try to challenge myself, and I like to think that I do challenge myself. It's always hard to psychoanalyze yourself, right?
Yep.
But I do my best to not just kind of give in to whatever like bias I might have. And I've watched your interview on Catholic Verses, and to me it kind of sounds like you're the same way. Tell the audience, because I've heard a little bit of your story. Tell the audience about your like religious upbringing and where you're at now.
Yeah. So I grew up in church, going to church twice a week, every week, at least maybe 3 times or 4 times. Very committed family, and they still are. And it was in the Nazarene Church, which is a Protestant. So, and Protestant denomination, and I don't know what that means from like a Catholic perspective, like how well you guys understand what that means to grow up in that situation. But it's not like I would go around identifying myself as Protestant ever.
Right.
So that wasn't really even part of my identity.
Yeah, it's funny. So I grew up trad, and the trads are all they like their words like Protestant, and then it's funny, you go talk to Protestants and they'll be like, "I'm just Christian. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
So it was like that for you, and I already know the answer, but did you stay Church of the Nazarene, Protestant Christian, faithfully? You never stopped going to church any less than 3 times a week.
So my wife and we met each other in the Nazarene Church, and we're both Christian. And we eventually stopped going to the Nazarene Church. Not specifically anything about that church. I had years ago as a teenager, had an experience with Jesus that totally just like flipped my whole world on its head. And I started reading the Bible at that time, like for myself. Before then, I didn't really read it that much, and found that there were some things in the church I grew up with that I knew I disagreed with, but we still attended that church. So the church I grew up in is part of it's called a holiness denomination. And so they have a history of having things that they ban people from doing. So like you couldn't drink alcohol, which I have a good Belgian
Ooh.
beer here tonight. No dancing, no smoking. Used to be no cards. Movie theaters used to be out. Not when I was a kid, but before I was a kid. So I'd already, I already knew Jesus turned water into wine, and I couldn't find any verses about cigarettes in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I already had, started to at least question the church I grew up in a little bit, but still enjoyed the fellowship, found the people to be, family, the people I grew up with. And so we attended there for a while. at some point, and this will probably come into our discussion a little bit, one Sunday morning while I was in church, kind of bored. Sometimes my mind wanders and I get bored. Because in the I was more evangelical than Protestant. Evangelical would be a closer identifier for what I grew up in. But the homilies or the sermons are very long. So like one Sunday I started to wonder, like, why is church the way it is? Like, why are we do things the way that we do them? And that kind of started me down a path of examining that question. And eventually we were part of some small house churches for a while, and I'm still on that journey. That was a difficult road, and I'm still on this journey of the past year kind of exploring church history more. I don't know very much, but Catholicism, the claims of Catholicism, Orthodoxy, even Mormonism. I met some Mormon missionaries a few years ago, and rather than just argue with them as I used to would have, I listened more to try and understand where they were coming from.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I can say firsthand that it's not easy to leave the religion that you grew up in. So you kind of made it sound like you said, like, oh yeah, it's just a process and I'm just still doing it. It's tough. It's tough to stop identifying as what you used to identify as. So hats off to you though for following the truth wherever you think it might lead, and for doing the investigations that are going to hopefully get you to a truer answer than you were at yesterday. You learn new stuff, you get a little bit closer to the truth. So in that vein, you've done and are still doing research on Catholicism.
Yeah.
And you and I got into a little bit of a back and forth under one of my videos. I don't even remember which video specifically. But you said something to the effect of, and I don't remember the exact language, so feel free to correct me, but it was something relatively strongly worded, not strong as in like a curse word or something, strongly as in like powerfully worded, like you have powerful reasons to suggest that the Catholic Church is false. And I think the stipulation was in the Bible, right? Like in the Bible, you say that there are some pretty solid reasons to not be Catholic. And I think I responded under that comment saying like, well, I'm not going to go as far as to say, like, I think it's, like, I don't remember if the word obvious was used, but maybe I introduced the word. I said something like, I don't think it's obvious from the Bible that the Catholic Church is false. And that comes from somebody who's an ex-Catholic, right? So you and I might agree in like the ultimate destination, if that destination is just anywhere that's not Rome, I guess. But the way that, the path that we both took to anywhere but Rome seems to be a little bit different. So I think tonight I'd really love to explore with you some of that stuff. And then I'm going to see if I can't offer a little bit of pushback if I think that some of the reasons that you think or some of the reasons that you take to get to my same conclusion aren't as strong as I think they are. That's where I'll push back. So I guess my first question for you is, did I do a pretty fair job summarizing the little bit of a back and forth that we had? Would you add anything? And then after that, go ahead and launch into the reasons.
Yeah. And I wouldn't, for myself, get too caught up in the semantics of that. The comment sections aren't the most, and myself included, aren't always the most carefully worded.
Agreed.
So, the idea that there's a slam dunk against the Catholic Church, I think that would be putting it too simply. But I do think, at least from where I stand today, I do think the more that I look into things, it does seem more clear. It seems clearer and clearer. And I can maybe share some of that journey or that process with you. And then also I do want to preface with, like my family and I, we just visited a new church in town tonight, just stopped in out of the blue for their potluck meal. And they're like, who are these random people? And it was wonderful. They actually had their Bible study thing was not a Bible study. It was about church history, which was kind of surprising.
Oh, wow. What kind of, was this a Catholic church? A Baptist church?
No,
wow.
Baptist. Yeah.
Studying church history? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, totally. So it was cool.
Cool.
I was super pumped.
Yeah.
And we visited several Catholic churches this past year, the Eastern Orthodox Church in our town. I went to the Mormon church this year, the Lutheran church. So, and I was telling my wife on our way home that like I find Jesus people in all of these different churches. I don't see the way I see the church is not limited to an organization.
Mm.
And it's helpful to get out there and go visit other people. As I started to do that as a teenager, I was part of the holiness church. We were supposed to be like more holy, than other churches. But then I would like meet my Baptist friends and be like, well, we're not more holy than these people. So that's another part of my take on things is if you have huge claims, whether it's as a Christian or as being the one true church, those claims need to be borne out in like the day to day. So a Catholic or a Mormon or whoever might be able to present to me like the most amazing arguments, but at the end of the day, like I'm going to go check it out. You might tell me this taco truck down the road is the best thing since sliced bread, but I'm going to go eat the tacos. And if they're not that great, it doesn't matter what the argument is. And I'm not saying that Catholic churches aren't amazing or that Catholics aren't amazing, but the Catholic Church does make a very strong claim, more than most Protestant churches. And so that in my estimation, that needs to be borne out by the day to day.
So, I both agree and disagree with just that first point there. And let me kind of explain what I mean. I do get surprised when I hear that somebody's religious and like their life had like, if somebody told me that they like, found Jesus and their life hadn't changed at all, like they were a terrible human being before and they're still a terrible human being, I would probably be skeptical of any kind of like religious claims that they've made. Like how, in what way did you find Jesus? You were terrible then, you're terrible now. So I suppose there's that. But I do want to push back a little bit against the idea that arguments matter less than going and checking it out. And perhaps this is just my, my empirical mind, my empirical brain. It's just my nature. But I could imagine some kind of church, like let's say that. So there's this organization. It's Catholic. It's the SSPV, not even the SSPX. The SSPV. There are 30, give or take a few, SSPV churches in the whole world, and they're all in the United States. And it's a very small group of pretty radical people who call themselves Catholic, but like they're really not Catholic. And the SSPV would tell you that like all non-SSPV churches are like illicit. You can't go to them. It's actually a sin to go to those. So, but imagine that the SSPV actually had the right arguments. Like, I think that those people, I've never met an SSPV, but if they're even crazier than the SSPX, then I have to imagine that they're all kind of wacky. And so you might go to the SSPV and there's no sense of community there. They're very hostile to outsiders. They don't do potluck dinners. But if their arguments are the best, then gosh darn it, their arguments are the best. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I guess my response to that is, I mean, that works at some level, but the Christian claims aren't just philosophical claims or worldview claims, even though they're presented that way a lot of times in the Christian world. The claims of Christianity are that God, that you reach out to God and that he interacts with you in like just this mysterious, like, in way, and it changes your life, so it's not just like, is it the correct math formula? And so like that's where it comes back to like the scriptures in the New Testament is that it's not a matter of having, I mean, the right doctrine matters.
Cat tax. Sorry.
Hello.
It's important. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. That was rude.
No, that's okay. So the right philosophy and doctrine do matter. But but at the end of the day, um, it's just as much. I don't know if I would put one over the other or anything, but it's just as much about like an embodied experience and lived out experience.
Um, so here's where I will agree with you. It's that if somebody is saying that they should, if their life should be transformed and their life is not transformed, I'd find that suspicious. But I will further share with you that the Catholic Church doesn't really view the church as like a method of transforming you as much as the church views itself as a hospital for sinners. So like, yeah, a lot of Catholics are sin. I mean, right? All Catholics are sinners, right? Um, and so it's not shocking when we have some Catholics who kind of seem like crappy people, you know? And I don't think that that's necessarily like it might give you reason to be suspicious and to dig deeper, but at least my empirical mind is saying the behavior of the members might give you reason to be suspicious and might give you reason to dig deeper, but I don't think that the behavior of the members really should sway anybody one way or the other when it comes to the truth claims of that organization, if that makes sense.
Um, yeah, I disagree with that. Um, I can think of like I didn't bring a whole list of like Bible verses or anything.
Oh,
for
and
this
that's fine. I didn't
conversation.
either.
Um, so I know that might surprise some Catholic listeners, but
Wait, you don't have the whole Bible memorized?
no.
Oh, wow. So you're Catholic.
So there is a scripture that I remember that says like they'll know you're Christians by your love. And it's not a kind of like the picture that's given is not a sort of love that I just drum up for myself, by myself. That it is a love from God that works kind of like miraculously amongst the people of God. There's a story of John Wesley. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, I am.
So he traveled. He was like a, I don't know, missionary preacher guy in the Church of England and traveled over to the United States to do missions work. And on the way over, they had some storms and troubles. And there was a group of, I think they were Moravian, this Christian group that was on the ship. And in the midst of like the troubles of the storm, this group was just acting different than the other groups, like they were still at peace. And then he got over and he did his missionary work, and he said something along the lines of when he got back home, he was
Sorry, I
I
did
saw
that's a funny comment.
Yeah.
And Hallie, I'm going to bring up your comment too in a second. I just didn't want to interrupt the flow. So sorry. Go ahead, CJ.
But he said, like, I went to basically do missions work for the Native American people, but it was I myself that needed converted. There was something about him encountering those people that was different. He couldn't quite figure out what was going on with them. And so that started a process for him of, thinking maybe there's more to this Christianity stuff. So I think in every church, there's going to be sinners and saints and mixed. And maybe sometimes you're one, even the saints will sin. But there also is an element of, and I've experienced it myself and been part of it myself, where if you are people, like the biblical claims are that if you are people who have been made new creations in Christ, and there's this Holy Spirit that is acting in your life, goodness beyond you can act yourself, that should look different. If Christianity doesn't bear that out, to be honest, I'm just not interested in any Christian church. Like those are the claims of the Bible.
Here's where you'll get complete agreement from me, and that is, I'm not interested in any kind of religion that I think has like really bad moral fruits. But when I say interested, I'm talking from like a completely secular perspective. So that's going to be different than people who aren't talking from a secular perspective.
Yeah.
Let me, and In the interest of time, I might kind of like agree to disagree about the moral fruits thing and then move on. But let me ask one last question from Hallie. So I was talking about how the church sees itself as a more of a hospital for sinners rather than like a gathering place for saints. And I think that Judas is probably a fairly decent biblical example of somebody who was one of the 12, and he was pretty rotten. Um, and I don't think that says anything about the teachings of Jesus. I think it says more about Judas himself than it does about the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, and we could even go to Peter. This is often
Sure.
brought up in the discussions, about bad popes or things like that. Peter really fell on his face flat,
Mm.
badly. Um, I would point out that like all of this is pre-Pentecost. This group of ragtag Jesus followers looked very different after Pentecost.
Sure did. Speaking in tongues and all that. Pretty
Well,
different.
yeah, and more than that. I mean, they became like voluntary communists, many of them, and sharing things in common, selling stuff. Like the way that they looked, as especially for us Americans, looked radically different than the society around them. So I think that's what I'm talking about is um don't sell me on a Christianity that doesn't look like what that early Christianity looked like. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to be part of a group of people that are like that, and not because they could somehow do that all themselves.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Um, at risk of, I said that was my last point.
No.
I'm in the middle of a few different books all at once. And
Yeah.
one of them is how the Catholic Church built Western civilization. And there's whole chapters in there about the moral fruits of the Catholic Church. And so I'm not one of those ex-Catholics who like tries to argue that the Catholic Church is like the worst thing to ever, and I think that the church, I don't excuse, the Spanish Inquisition was bad, right? They killed a few thousand people, they imprisoned a few 100,000 people or something like that. That's bad over the course of a couple hundred years. That's bad, right? Wish that didn't happen. But the entire hospital system, like the entire hospital system and the entire education system is a result of like Catholic influence on Europe, pretty much. So we could spend the next 5 hours talking just about like the moral fruits of the Catholic Church alone, all the good and the bad. But I'm wondering if you want to get into some of the other points that you think are like pretty solid reasons to doubt that the Catholic Church is one true church.
Yeah. So I mean that would be a big one for me.
Moral fruits, sure.
Not just moral fruits in the gigantic historic sense, but even the day to day, the congregations that I go visit here in town. If you are the one true church, and you're saying like we have like the Eucharist and you have a fake communion, we have the true communion, and the claims that I hear regularly, I would expect to see some sort of movement in God amongst this people, even though they're sinners among, that are part of that, something that is different where I go, wow, where I have that John Wesley moment and say, these people are different.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but if you want to see different, go check out a trad church. It's very different. So 70% of Catholics in the United States, or maybe 70% in the world, I'm not sure, don't believe in the real presence. And so I'm not super surprised if you just kind of go to your local Novus Ordo. I think it's probably conservatively 70% are they don't believe in the real presence. But you might have a very different experience. Now, the trads might not be the most welcoming people. Maybe things have changed. But you would, if you walked into a trad church, you would be surrounded by people who absolutely believe in the real presence, and they act like it's the real presence. Like you cannot cross the center of the church without genuflecting, and you only receive on the tongue. And like they, if you went to one of those congregations, you might be moved in ways that you wouldn't be moved going to a different church.
Yeah, I'm impressed by their sincerity in their religiousness.
Is that not what you're
Um,
talking about? Maybe.
Not quite, not quite. Um, what my experience of what happened with me and some of my other friends in high school at the same time. It's not like that we became ultra religious all of a sudden and we're following like these certain, really prescribed traditions. Um, I assume you're familiar with the fruits of the Holy Spirit, laid out in one of the books of the Bible. I don't know which one. Maybe Galatians. I don't know.
Yeah.
But those things, um, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. Not that we can't do some of those things ourselves, but those things in a level that just doesn't seem normal. Um, and
Yeah.
it's not like that's a little different than just like we are very strict religiously.
I
It's
do get that. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
get that. I went to Asbury for the revival. I to the tail end
Okay.
of
Yeah.
it. That was very different. That maybe more of what you're talking about?
I mean, I haven't been there, like, and I
You
would
can
say the
imagine,
long term
probably.
matters because it's also not just emotionalism.
Yeah, yeah, fair. So, okay, well, let me ask this then. So you're not exactly looking for just plain old like belief and adherence to like tradition, but you're also not looking for just plain old emotionalism. So what exactly are you talking about?
Well, um, this, like I said, the verse, they'll know you're Christians by your love. There you go.
There it is. Thank you.
Except I need the reference. I need the reference.
It's right here. Galatians
Okay.
5:22-23.
Hey, I
You
got it
were
right.
right.
Um, so those things, and it's easy to just put out a list for those. That's a good quote.
Yeah. I don't Sorry, I literally CJ, this is like the fourth time that I've like interrupted you really bad.
It's
Um
okay.
I'll address this after you're done making your point because I literally asked you a question and then I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
I mean, the early church, I'll just go back to the early church. You know, they they acted in ways just like of the overflow of their heart that were just radically different. You had people saying like, "Man, I've got this extra house or this piece of land. I'm just going to sell it, I'm going to give it to this the fellow group, you know." Um and like just joy overflowing and peace overflowing. Um I think my norm, at least my experience, the normal human existence isn't always like that. There can be a lot of anxiety and just heaviness. Not That's not to say that the Christian life never has any of that, but there is, the Bible does present a picture of something that looks different in the face of our regular human existence.
Yeah. Um
So,
I guess I don't disagree. And and I think you can probably find people who match that description in virtually any religion. I guess the question is, do some religions have a higher percentage of people who seem to embody those values versus other religions, perhaps? But there seems to be good people everywhere. You know what I mean?
well, and yeah, and I've met Catholics who embody that thing I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the claim is the one true church, and I've also been a part of and experienced myself and met Protestants who embody that.
Mm.
And maybe this is where we can step to the next thing,
Sure, let's do it.
is like, because Catholics, I think, would grant that there are people, they don't know where the boundaries of the church end.
Correct. Yep.
So, but the way that so our family started reading through the New Testament in January. Um, after hearing a lot of Catholic and Orthodox and Mormon claims, you know, and grappling with those, I, as a good Protestant, I was like, I'm going to go back. I'm going to read through those earliest writings, um, and I'm going to see what those New Testament writings, see if it lines up with what I've been hearing. And so the one of the questions is, um, what is the church? You know,
Yeah, I mean, in the early church, it kind of seemed like the church was just like rough ragtag groups of people that Paul kind of would just gather up in a certain city, and then eventually he'd be like, "All right, you guys have to govern yourselves. I'm off to the next city. Bye." Like that was kind of the church back then.
yeah. And I think there's something to that. Um, it developed into something different, and perhaps a Catholic perspective would be that, like, that's that was a good thing. That's where it should have been going. Um, but um, but what's described in the New Testament is less of an institution with like roles. Or, I mean, not roles. I meant with like positions, like the United States has the president, right? Like you're elected to that position. You may or may not fill that role well. Whereas the early church, it seems to be more like that the body was more organic.
I don't disagree, and I'm going to be honest. I don't think many Catholics would disagree either. That like the earliest church was super grassroots organic. Um, let's not forget that Paul was writing his epistles like 20 years after Jesus died. Like Paul was writing his epistles in like the 50s, like the 40s and 50s. And then he probably died somewhere in the 60s, right? So that's like wow. Like that's as early as it gets Christianity. And I don't think that the Catholic claim is, oh, the church has had this exact structure ever since like Jesus rose from the dead, and then bam, everything was in place. Peter was just teleported to Rome. A funny hat appeared on his head, and that was it. I don't think that's the Catholic claim, right? I think the Catholic claim is more about Jesus left the apostles in charge, and then over time, the apostles set up the Catholic Church. So Peter took residence in Rome. If Peter took residence in a different city, then that other city would like be, the Catholic Mecca, yeah, for lack of a better term. So I don't think that Catholics are like tying themselves to this specific structure because this specific structure is supposed to be found in the New Testament. I don't think that this specific structure is supposed to be found in the New Testament. Instead, what is found is Jesus giving his apostles the right to set up the church. You are Peter, and upon this rock I found my church. Peter then went to Rome, and so Rome is kind of the seat of the church. So what do you think about all that?
So I think Rome is the seat of the church, probably more for political reasons. Like tonight, the lesson was on Constantine's conversion. So I think that was a development. And again, I'm not a historian,
Yeah,
but
and
from
Constantine was
what
in
I'm
Byzantium
seeing,
anyway, right?
what was that?
Constantine wasn't ruling in Rome, right? He was ruling in New Rome, Byzantium.
Oh, was he?
I believe
Okay.
so. Yeah. I
And
believe.
then there
Chat,
was
call me out,
another,
chat. Somebody in the chat
yeah.
knows.
But anyways, the church and state did have kind of a wedding together of,
Yeah.
you know, and so I do think that affected things quite a bit. Um, and I don't see like one teaching or one like recording of Jesus saying to Peter that he's the rock, and on the rock he's going to build this church. Um, so when I read through scripture, especially this time, I'm not trying to like read through to say, here's a verse that supports this, here's a verse that supports that. looking at the whole narrative. Okay.
Thanks, Nick. So
Okay. There.
cool.
Um, so I'm looking at the whole narrative, you know, just like if you were to read Lord of the Rings and you had some theory about Lord of the Rings and you could find like something about that theory, you want to read the whole story to see if it supports that, you know. And when I read through the New Testament, I don't see, like, I see Jesus enacting a different type of church leadership. In fact, he says, don't do it like the nations do it. Don't do it like the kingdoms of earth. And like I think one of the most, I think the church and the state being wed later in history was a bad thing for Christianity. Now, maybe God worked through it despite that, but Jesus, from everything I can see, he came and he was setting up something that looks different than like a normal kingdom of the world.
And do you think that the Catholic Church looks like a normal kingdom of the world?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't, and and I say that as somebody who's not Catholic. I think the Catholic Church is fairly unique. Was it the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire? Yes. Holy Roman, referring to the post-Rome Roman Empire, where Constantinople was a seat. Yes, it was the official state religion of the Holy Roman Empire. Um, but that was also 400 years after the founding of the religion, um, and the religion had already kind of like spread out by then. Um, and I don't think that it's the Catholic Church's fault that the government in Byzantium decided to make it the state religion. You know what I mean? Like it's like if um and then I do think it's fair to critique popes in the Middle Ages who waged wars and stuff like that, because like there were like the papal states had a standing army at one point. And I think that that's like fair to critique, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Um, but I don't know. I guess I just don't see. Um, I guess I just don't think that the church looks like other governments of the world.
Well, there's certainly going to be differences, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like, based upon reading through scripture so far as I've read,
Thank you, Nick.
that
Sorry.
that if you had Peter, this fisherman, you know, who is one of the leaders in the church, that early church, I think if he came and saw the Catholic Church, let's say of the last 100 years, I think he would be surprised to see capital cities and thrones and those type of things. You know, the apostles seem to act in a very different way than that. Even like reading recently where Paul on purpose is saying like I have like some authority, like I do believe in church authority, but Paul is like I'm not going to enact that authority. Like they seemed very, it doesn't seem like they ruled in that kind of a way. And in fact, it really doesn't seem like they ruled like regular governments. Um, and there are things in scripture that talk about that the way that church leadership is should be a different thing. So like what I see from the Catholic leadership, like in the Vatican, looks more like regular country stuff to me, like a nation.
I mean, I might agree with you in terms of like some medieval popes, but I don't think that Francis is doing anything nationly.
No, he definitely has taken a different posture, right? Which is notable for him, where he says, "I'm not going to." And I think even starting at Vatican II, now I'm starting to really stretch myself, you know. But I think there was an attempt to take a different posture then. Like, didn't they stop wearing the tiara or whatever it was? Um, which pope was that at Vatican II?
Oh, Vatican II was, oh shoot. See, I hated Vatican II growing up.
Right,
Hated. I didn't know about it.
John.
JP2?
Not two, but
No.
the six, John six or something.
Yeah. See, you're a better Catholic than I am.
Um, so, but I have seen some attempts, you know, by the leadership that head that direction a little bit more.
I mean, I would say that the last 200 years, the church has been like really not political. Um, 200 years ago, there was a document that I think of as like the last document that like showed that the church was still trying to be involved with government, and that would be a document called the Syllabus of Errors. And in the Syllabus of Errors, the Pope just listed a whole bunch of things that are errors. And one of the errors that he listed was the separation of church and state. So he was saying that church and state should not be separated. And then that's kind of like the last time that you hear about the separation of church and state being a bad thing. That was in like the 1860s or something. So maybe not 200 years ago, but since the start of the 20th century, for sure, the church has been, in my opinion, pretty uninvolved with like worldly governments. And I think even like comparing the organization of the Catholic Church to other governments is even in the medieval era, because like the church was almost like a uniting factor between all the different governments. You know what I mean? Like the king of Spain and the king of France and the king of Germany would all have been Catholic all at the same time, and like the Pope could like all call those monarchs into the same room and be like, you guys have to figure your stuff out, like stop fighting with each other. Now that didn't always happen. Some of the popes literally waged their own wars to like expand the papal states and stuff like that. So and fair, it's fair to critique those popes. I just don't know if I see that as a reason to think that the church isn't the one true church.
Well, so a few things. One is like coming from a Protestant church where I never even knew who my church leaders were at the headquarters of the church. Like seeing the Catholic Church is more of a shock to me because I didn't grow up with that.
That makes sense.
So I'm constantly peeling the onion back and seeing all the layers of like whoa, you know, like even just learning there was a throne is kind of a crazy thing. Or so, and I probably find more kinship with like the radical reformers, like the Anabaptist tradition. To me, their posture, you know, because they on purpose want to keep a separation of church and state. A lot of Anabaptists won't, you know, won't vote or.
And that exists.
Sorry, to
me,
ahead. That reads more like the picture of what I see in the New Testament scriptures. Not to say that they would go as far as the Anabaptists went.
I agree 100% that is what you see in the scriptures of the New Testament. And I guess I just have two things to say. I guess the first is that you'll find plenty of Catholics who fit that description. Like you'll find plenty of Catholics who like would love to see the church be like, there's like an expression. It was said in like trad circles. I don't know if they say it in other circles too, but it was something to the effect of like, you can harbor a medieval sense of piety by being completely ignorant of what the Pope is doing. I probably butchered that expression, but the whole idea of it was, don't worry about the Pope. Let the Pope do Pope stuff. You do you stuff. And you stuff doesn't involve the Pope. Be a good person in your local community. Give to the poor. Say your prayers. And let the Pope do the poping. And so you'll find that same attitude within the Catholic Church. Now, you'll also find the integralists, who are a group of Catholics who think that, like, all governments should be, Catholic governments. But you know, you'll find both.
Well, when we visited the Greek Orthodox Church, they had two eagles on the floor. Are you familiar with that symbol?
Like for the U.S., sure, but I'm not familiar with it in like an Orthodox.
I think it's Eastern. I've seen it on some YouTube channels, Catholic YouTube channels even. But it's two. I Googled it while I'm there in the service because it's a very long service. And one represented the state and one represented the church. You know?
Interesting.
And for me, I was like, you're like, no.
Same, but for like different reasons.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, that's not the Christianity that I see in the New Testament.
And so that actually leads me into my next point. And this is change of topic, but still there. I agree that you don't find the modern church structure in the New Testament. Because the New Testament, I mean, let's be the most generous to me and say that Second Peter is the last book of the New Testament. Second Peter was written some part in the later half of the second century. So Second Peter was written around 170 or something like that. It's a
Okay.
complete forgery. Who cares? 170. It's no wonder we don't see the modern church structure in the Bible. It's not at all surprising. I don't think that any Catholic expects to see the church structure even of the year 250 in a
Yeah,
document that was dated to 150. Like, so I just think that most Catholics kind of hear this critique and they're like, that doesn't bother me in the slightest. So what do you think
sure.
about that?
That's understandable from that perspective. If your perspective is that Jesus came to institute a church that's going to become an organization, and that it starts as like an acorn and grows into a mighty oak, then that makes sense from that perspective. From what I can and I've heard the critique of Protestants is like Jesus didn't pen a single line of scripture. Like he didn't come to deliver a Bible. And I agree with that. But also, I don't read that he's instituting a church in the way that someone might think if you're going to start a new religious organization. I think that he came to teach. I think, and he taught those apostles primarily. And then I think he came to die on the cross and raise from the dead. But then I think the main thing is to deliver his spirit. And so I think beyond that, like that seems like the clearest picture. And if you read through the epistles on further, that seems like, what was happening. The clues for like, this is an acorn to grow into what I see in the Catholic Church. I'm not seeing that in the DNA there.
Um, so what if somebody asked you something like this? How do we even know what is scripture and what's not scripture? Why aren't you referring to the Shepherd of Hermas? Why aren't you referring to the Epistle of Clementine? These are books that almost made it into the New Testament, but they didn't. Um, so, so, like, how did you even, if you don't have any kind of oak tree, right? If it kind of stops at this acorn, like, then you don't even have a Bible, right? You don't even know what's scripture.
Well, so I would put that, first of all, I would say I don't have a great answer for that because I haven't looked into it super deep, but let me share with you how I would approach it. First of all, to me, that sounds like just a surface level Catholic apologetic answer, to be honest. Like it's not new to me. So the way I would approach it is the way that the people put the canon together in the first place. It wasn't like some sort of magical draw it out of the hat type of thing. you
Oh, it
know
was a vote.
it was a vote, but there was, I'm sure, discussion with it, and even for hundreds of years beforehand, people talking about this. So what they were trying to get at was they're trying to have recorded the apostolic witness, right? And so the principles that they used for that, what is the apostolic witness, I would be comfortable using those same principles too. So even things like the Didache, or other things, I would consider those things as holding a lot of weight. I
So let's pick on, pick your favorite non-biblical biblical text. How about the Clementine epistle? So,
okay,
Clementine wrote that, and he says like, yeah, like Peter got martyred, and he's talking about it like it didn't happen that long ago. So he probably wrote this thing right at the tail end of the first century, making the Clementine's epistle is probably like 70 years younger than Second Peter. To me, that's a slam dunk that like Clementine's epistle should be considered like a New Testament scripture, and Second Peter, in my opinion, is out. Like I think that's like a clear forgery, speaking
sure.
plainly.
Sure.
So Clement, thank you, Clement. Wow, I'm dumb. Um, uh, but
Do you know why it didn't make it in?
it wasn't circulated very much. We didn't even have a copy of it until like the 1800s or something.
Yeah, it's like the Didache.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I would put weight on those things. It's
How
not
much?
like it's not like I just totally ignore those things. For me, the historic picture for me as I look at Catholicism and Orthodoxy is, um, like many of the things have a pretty strong historical picture until you get like, 300s, 200s, New Testament,
I
they
do
get
agree.
and it gets fuzzier and fuzzier.
Yeah.
So, and you would think, especially with the New Testament is not nothing. The New Testament is I mean, that's a huge piece of history to have so many letters.
Oh, enormous. Yeah.
It's a fairly clear picture of what the church was like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, so and it's difficult. Like, I don't know which argument to go with, is one argument is that it's an acorn that developed into an oak tree. And then the other argument is we're the OG church. Join us because we've always been the same kind of thing. Um,
I I completely agree about the point about like early church history being murky. Um, do you know the name of the sixth pope?
no.
Sixtus. Do you know what
Okay.
Sixtus means?
Is it sixth?
It means sixth.
Yeah.
We don't know his name. So, but if you go read like a martyrology, it just says that the sixth pope name was Sixtus.
Yeah.
And it's like funny. There was like a Sixtus the second, and there's been like a Sixtus the sixth, which is like hilarious because like they're naming themselves after like a placeholder for somebody's name that we just lost. But
Well,
but we
if you
lost.
ever return to Catholicism and become Pope, Kevin,
I'll be Pope Sixtus the seventh.
I know what your name's going to be.
But I do think it's funny that we've lost. Not funny. It's tragic that we've lost so much of history just to documents being lost and destroyed and all that. But I guess that's kind of neither here nor there. Um, I'm taking a look at the time, and I've got a bunch of questions for us lined up in
Okay.
the chat. But before we go to questions, did you
Yeah.
want to bring up like maybe one or two other points? And I'll promise
Maybe
to kind
one
of
more.
okay, and I'll be quiet. I'll kind of like let you go.
It's okay. It's
Okay.
okay. This is what kept Lewis out of the church, I think.
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. It's often said or recounted that he couldn't join the church because he grew up in Ireland. So, but that's not all that he said about it. Part of his issue was that he wasn't just agreeing to everything the church has said to this point dogmatically, but he's also assenting to agree to what someone will say in the future dogmatically.
So sorry. So the argument is we shouldn't like a solid reason not to be Catholic is because being Catholic means that you are pre-assenting to. I'm really not going to have too much pushback for
And
you.
so, and what I read in the New Testament is not that picture. The picture of I submit my will to the church's dogmatic teaching. I think there is an authority, and you should respect and assent to a certain level to church authorities in the New Testament. But the New Testament has a lot of encouragements for people to search things out for themselves. And Paul even says, if I or even an angel from heaven comes and teaches you a different gospel, like, don't listen to that. So there definitely are those like the doctrinal tests. And when I speak with like Mormons or Catholics, kind of my question for them is how do you know your church is wrong if they were ever to go off the rails and teach something dogmatically wrong? And sometimes it's like, I don't get, sometimes I'm not sure they could see if there was an error. Like, how do you recognize that? If a pope were to teach something dogmatically wrong and you're a Catholic under that paradigm, like, how do you see it? And I'm not sure I have a good answer for what that even looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, with regard to like future ascent, I'm really not going to have any pushback at all for you there. Um
But even current ascent, you know,
yeah, the only thing I'm going to say about current ascent is that you know everything that you're ascenting to, and so if you already assent to it, like okay, I still don't like it personally, just because it's my every single position that I take is tentative. Every single last one. I'm open to changing my mind on absolutely anything if the data suggests that I should. If you are assenting even to current stuff at the level to which the church necessitates you to assent to her dogma, you are closing the door to ever changing your mind. Um,
but I think the Catholic Church is asking too much. You know, when I look at the list of what those things are and I read the New Testament, it's it's too much for me. You know,
it's
it's too
funny.
expansive.
You and I agree, but for different reasons. Um, I so actual real Kevin doesn't care what the New Testament says. Real Kevin doesn't care.
Yeah.
But even Kevin with his Catholic hat on also kind of doesn't care. Now that's not quite true, but even like the Catholic Kevin doesn't care that much about what the New Testament says in the sense that that's only part of the picture.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of what we discussed tonight kind of comes down to the difference between like are we taking into account anything outside the Bible? And if the answer is yes, we're going to take tradition into account, then I think all of a sudden the Catholic position doesn't look nearly as crazy as it might if you don't take that tradition into account. If you say like, nope, the Bible is all that I'm willing to look at, then I think that you are stuck with this Pauline church. You
Well,
know?
I would take further things into account. I think it makes sense. The further along it goes in time, I would put less weight on those things.
How do you know how much time like so something that happened in the year 300 is probably going to be better than something that happened in 1300, which will be better than something that will happen in 2300, sure, but like what does that scale look like? Are we looking at like a steep drop off after the year 100, or are we looking at like a steady decline? Like how do you determine that?
Well, logarithmically, I have a formula that I use.
Do you really? I was gonna say
Yeah.
that would actually be really funny. You pull up this white paper. You're like, yeah, actually, I've written a whole paper on it. I've got
No.
Okay, cool. I've kept you for an hour already. We've got some questions if you don't mind. But was there any other like argument that you were really hoping to talk about tonight that we didn't get to?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I would encourage if someone is a Christian, or even if you're not a Christian and you just want to know historically, um, like I hear a lot of stories of people converting between churches. Like if you're a Christian, I would say before you convert either way, like go read the New Testament. I know the New Testament gets ragged on a lot, but like if you're a Christian, that is an important set of texts.
I'm gonna say it's an important set of texts, even if you're not a Christian. It's just an important set of texts
Yep.
for any person who's interested in world history.
Yeah.
So, obviously, important kind of takes a different meaning for the Christian versus the non-Christian, but
And then
important nonetheless.
right. And I do have, maybe at the end of the Q&As or now or whenever, but I do have an argument for God I want to run by you.
Okay. I'm fine with. Would you rather talk about that now and then do Q&A right after?
It's your show.
Let's do it. Hit me with it.
Tacos.
This is so I literally watched your thing with Catholic Verses
Yeah.
on the day it came out, and then I rewatched it today, so it's fresh in my mind. It's like an argument from Beauty a la C.S. Lewis, right? Argument from Desire almost.
Yeah, from like wonderfulness, I would
Yeah,
call it.
yeah. And I find that argument very um aesthetic, if that makes sense. Um, but I have this problem where I'm so empirically minded
Yeah.
that I just don't get super moved by stuff like that. If you know what I mean.
So,
Um,
so you're saying you're not super moved by tacos?
I do like tacos, but if you wanted to find my taco, it would.
Mm.
You're gonna laugh. It's pancakes.
No,
I
okay.
love pancakes. Pancakes are the best thing since sliced bread. Honestly, probably better than sliced bread. I love pancakes. So the argument from pancakes.
Yeah.
Do you want to flesh it out a little bit? Because I know what you're talking about, but my audience might not.
Well, it sounds so anti-intellectual. It sounds so shallow. But I guess, and I'm not sure that I have put a lot of meat on those bones, you know. But to me, the experience of wonder in the world, and then trying to harmonize that with the concept of we live in a big accident that seems like it has meaning, but doesn't have meaning. Those two, that works in my brains. There's sometimes where I feel like God is not there at all, you know, like I understand that mentally, you know, but then the experience of the taco, like once I actually experience that, you know, or the pancake, I'm going to go with your pancakes. The fact that you have taste buds and you were able to cook this thing and have this thing passed down to you, and the enjoyment that is there from that, and the civilizations that existed so that you could get your pancakes, you know, it, like, to really experience it in its in its full depth. That could be pancakes, bach, tacos, beer, you know, and then to say it's an accident, it doesn't, you know,
And
it doesn't seem accidental.
well, I'm actually gonna meet you halfway. Maybe not halfway, but I don't think it's an accident either. I
Mm.
don't think there's such a thing as an accident. So because I'm a determinist, I don't think that there's such a thing as an accident.
But it's essentially the same thing.
Um, I'm going to say that there's no agency,
Yeah.
but I don't think that I, sorry, Father John Brown just joined, and we're talking about pancakes as a proof for God. Father, you're
It just got
sorry,
good.
Father. Yeah,
It just got good.
we're debating the ontological status of pancakes, Father. So yeah, try to keep up. Um, so if anything that occurs without agency is an accident, then I understand what you're talking about. But that's kind of weird because then it sounds like, like there are trillions of accidents happening every second on the planet Mars right now. And that's like, well, that's not quite what people mean when we talk about accidents, right? Like, um, every now and then, some kind of storm on Mars. Does Mars have storms? I don't know. Every now and then, a meteor will crash into Mars, and a boulder on the top of a hill will roll down to the bottom of that Martian hill. Was the rolling of that boulder an accident? I don't know. I don't think that's how people usually use the word. I think that people usually use the word to describe the actions of an agent, but the agent did something that the agent didn't intend to do. So if I'm just removing agency entirely from the picture, that's why I don't use the word accident. Does that?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
and that
But
might be
I think,
semantics.
right, I think it is semantics, yeah.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like I took a walk the other night, and I saw the moon out and the stars, and it just, you know, it struck me. You know, there's reasons that people write poems about the moon. They should write more poems about tacos, but and pancakes. I am able to see that through just the physical empirical world. And in fact, I think I'm going to write a poem about this, you know. Um, I can see that the moon is orbits around the Earth. It's a satellite around the Earth. It reflects these nuclear rays from the sun. But to see like that, that's all that's going on is I believe to miss what's happening. Um, like I, it'd be like if I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example. If I went and punched a random person on the street and they're like, hey, took offense to it, obviously. And I was like, it was just molecules going from one place to another. These molecules here, I feel like it misses the meaning that is there that I'm experiencing to think that the Mexican culture deterministically came about, you know, and that I deterministically am in this place to experience this determined taco. The taco feels like more than just a determined event taking place in my mouth.
Yeah. So I totally get what you're saying. And the reason, so sometimes I feel like I'm just like a fuddy duddy when I talk about this stuff. But it appears when you actually look at everything that we can possibly look at, it appears like that determinism stuff is true, right? Like when we look at the moon, we just see the moon stuff, right? We see the particles that make up the moon, and we see that the moon is illuminated by those nuclear blasts from the sun. And how do we see anything at all? Well, it's actually just photons, and the photons travel from the sun and they bounce off the moon and they hit our eyeballs. And at the end of the day, yeah, that's it. And
Well, I
and
think you mean to say we measure that.
yeah, right. We measure that.
'Cause the other night I see more than that. The taco, like you can measure what's going on in my brain and everything.
Yeah,
I'm experiencing more than what we measure.
and that's my point though, is that I don't think that we are experiencing more than what we measure. I mean, that's not to say that we like have measured everything ever. But I think that we can totally explain the sensation of the taco by relying on nothing else besides the taco molecules, and then also the neurons in our brain and how they fire when we consume those taco molecules. And so I guess my question for you would be, and I'm going to put words in your mouth, and then I'm going to ask you to correct me. You've got an intuition that there's more. Is there anything? And
I
yeah,
have an experience that there's more.
what
Intuition
are?
can that be experienced?
So I would just describe an intuition as like a brain state. It's just like a belief that you have. I actually read a really good paper on intuitions one time, and people were. I think it was like Josh Rasmussen was describing intuition as a. What's that fancy word that means like it's a one of a kind of brain state, like I don't remember. Doesn't matter. It's like a French word. But let's just refer to an intuition as like a belief. So you have a belief that there's more, because you experience more. What are you experiencing?
Well, I think when they measure my brain, let's say they put me in an fMRI machine and they're measuring what's happening in my brain. I think they are seeing the results of what is happening, but I don't think that they're seeing the causes of what is happening. You know, just the same way that you might, like, I think there is more going on that we experience than just what empirical science can break it down as. I think it's a too narrow of a lens, to hear a beautiful song by Bach or whoever you like the most beautiful song in the world, and to only see it as, I know you don't like this word accident, but to only see it as a determined result of naturalistic causes that have no foundational meanings behind them. Like that makes sense in my head. Like I follow that line of thinking until I hear the song. I think our experience can't be, if someone's never had pancakes and you explain to them pancakes and then they go and have pancakes, they are going to interact with something beyond what you just told them. They're going,
So,
you know,
well, so I actually agree there, and the difference is between like what they're interacting with when I'm telling them is just the wiggly air as it hits their ears. But then what they're interacting with when they actually eat the pancake is they're actually interacting with the pancake. So
True.
that is different. Um, I think, and so Father Brown says that I might be guilty of like looking into one house, looking into one window, not seeing anybody, and then saying nobody's home. I haven't seen the whole house though, and yes, yeah, um, I definitely don't have it all figured out. Um, Nobody does, but um, I don't see a reason to. So I get it's anticlimactic, but it's Occam's razor. So don't multiply things into your ontology without needing them. Um, if I can explain the moon, like the beauty of the moon, using nothing but photons and atoms of moon stuff, and then neurons in my brain, and also the lenses in my eyes and all that, then great. I don't think I'm willing to make the jump and say that there must be something more because I experience beauty. Because we understand even that the experience of beauty is neurons firing in the brain. Like I think that a really good way for somebody to just like shatter my whole worldview would be to prove some kind of disembodied mind. Like if we could find some kind of disembodied mind, that would destroy my whole worldview.
Well, I don't see how science explains beauty. So I think science
It
can
doesn't.
explain the effects of beauty, but Occam's razor, I believe, still leaves the door wide open for, like, I need to explain the beauty of this moon somehow. You know, it definitely at least leaves a space for doing that. Now, however you decide to fill that in, is one way to do that. You know, but I would probably just leave it at. I hope you have amazing tacos in your area.
I
If
I
you have
do.
them, think of my argument.
I will. I will. And I eat tacos like way too much. Um
Mm,
and I'm from the Northeast. I'm from like relatively close to New York City proper. I lived in New Jersey, so not in New York, but great tacos, unsurprisingly. I now live in Lexington, Kentucky, and I was really worried that the tacos here were not going to be up to par. Tacos here are excellent, so I'm quite happy with the tacos around me. So next time I get tacos, I'll think of you.
awesome.
What do you say? You want to do some questions? We got a
Yeah,
bunch. Okay.
I'm game.
It's gonna.
I'm not sure I'm gonna have any great answers, but
Some of them are for you. Some of them are for you and me.
okay.
So give me a second. I got to scroll all the way back up because there was a couple at the beginning. And okay. So here we go. This is something that you can't be wrong about because it's just your opinion. So good one to start on. So do you think that Catholics in good standing with the church, belief wise, can be saved?
Um, what does it mean to be in good standing with the church belief wise?
Um, I imagine what's meant here is something like there's a Catholic who
They
consents to all church dogma. They go to
Yeah,
mass once a week. They go to
yeah.
confession once a month. That that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, but I kind of also take the Catholic stance on this in that I leave a lot of space for God to make those decisions. And I hope he doesn't involve me with making those decisions at all.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I don't want that job.
Cool. Here's a question for you. Did you ever encounter the entire sanctification movement?
Moment. Yeah. Well, if this person means movement, that was a big part of our church as a holiness church. Um, I probably don't agree with that doctrine. Um,
Would you explain
but
it
I
to me? Because I'm not familiar with it.
so it's a doctrine that you might be saved, you might be baptized and saved in the church. but that there is a second work of grace that God does in a believer's life where he takes away the propensity for natural sin, that like the sin will in a
Hmm.
person. And not
So,
that you would never sin again, but that you don't have that bent the same way.
and you, like, if you subscribe to this kind of thinking, you would expect that people who are sufficiently holy enough would just like never want to sin ever, kind of.
They wouldn't phrase it sufficiently holy enough. It would be that God had done that work in
Oh,
your life.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's
And
me with
that
my works-based salvation.
it would be that God works that holiness.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay.
And that you wouldn't have to sin every day, I have experience in my life, like I said, when I was a teenager, there's like a radical shift of my will and desires and propensities, proclivities. So
Cool. Okay. Uh, here's one. Again, it's just your experience. You can't be right or wrong here. Have you ever looked into any Catholic saints?
not much, a little bit. Heard some about Francis of Assisi through a musician I really like, Rich Mullins, who he really liked Francis of Assisi, and he was one of those Christian people. Are you familiar with him?
No. Well,
He's one of those.
I'm familiar with Francis of Assisi, but not the
Oh yeah,
music.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's one of those Christians who looked way different than regular folks. He
Huh.
was a super popular Christian musician in the 90s, like one of the top ones, but only took a regular working man's salary and kind of lived like a homeless life. And so he was part of a group of friends, and they called themselves the Kid Brothers of St. Frank.
Huh. Fun fact about Saint Francis of Assisi was that Francis was almost my confirmation name, um, because I just loved animals. Frankly, I was confirmed like, frankly, too young. I was confirmed when I was like 10, um,
Mm.
and that's like a thing. Like tradies tend to do confirmation younger than their Novus Ordo counterparts, in my experience. Anyway, I don't know if that's true across the board or if my chapel was just weird, but I was confirmed when I was 10. I wanted to have Francis of Assisi as my confirmation name, but my friend got to it first. So I had to come up with a different saint. So I picked St. John Vianney, the patron saint of priests, because I thought I was going to be a priest. And here I am now. I don't know if I've ever told that story on YouTube before, but yeah, my confirmation name is John Vianney, the patron saint of priests, and then I got married when I was 22. So it didn't quite work out for me, but that's just a funny story. Um, okay, I've got another. This is more of a comment than a question, but it might be interested to get your opinion. So, we were talking about like the integration of the Catholic Church with governments and why that might be a reason to think that the church isn't the one true church. I push back a little bit on that, but something that I didn't bring up that I think is a good point was actually brought up in the comments. So let me give you just a little bit of context here. So we've got people saying you got to remember stuff like the sacking of Rome in 1527. Rome was definitely sacked. Maybe the Pope was kidnapped. I don't remember. And W. Bren is saying it seems like a legit reason to have a standing army if people are sacking your city. Yeah, maybe. What do you think about that?
Um, I'm not completely opposed to the idea. Like the Anabaptists are like they won't serve in the military, or at least in any, they won't bear arms. Um, and but I do think, in the Bible, I think it doesn't completely rule that out, that you could be a soldier and be a Christian, you know. Um, but I do, again, I'm broken record. I think Christians should look different than the rest of the world. And I'm not super interested in Christianity that's just like a more religious version of the rest of the world. So I'm not like, if we're just taking votes today, I'm going to vote against the Christian army thing.
Uh, I would too. I don't love the idea of any kind of. I'm anti integralism. I think that's a recipe for disaster, but that's just me. I'm not.
What is integralism?
And sorry, integralism is the idea that like the church and the state should be one and the same, and that like we should be. So like an integralist would be somebody who thinks that like not only should like gay marriage be illegal and like stuff like that, but like also it should probably be illegal for a restaurant to serve meat on Ash Wednesday, because you can't eat meat on Ash Wednesday. So like restaurants should be barred from serving meat on Ash Wednesday.
Well, as someone who grew up evangelical in the 80s, when like a lot of this stuff was going down, I think like the combination of church and state in the 300s, I think that was bad for the church in a lot of ways. I also think in America, it was the same way for the church. I think as the church, we got too cozy with wanting political power in the United States.
Well said. Well said. I think I see one more question. So if I missed your question, leave a thing, and I will get to it. But so Hallie did step away for a little bit in the middle, I know. So she's saying maybe she misunderstood, but here's a question. So do you think that Jesus wanted to create a church where every individual gets to determine the faith by their individual experience? And this may have been related somewhat to the first point where it was almost like a moral fruits kind of argument, not quite moral fruits, but that almost seems like you could have two different people being both totally equally rational, but just living in different geographies and then coming to totally separate conclusions. Like they can't both be right. So what's going on there? That's how I interpret Hallie's question anyway.
I think that every Christian should be their own pope.
Oh, wow. Clip that.
No, I'm half kidding. But I do think we have a responsibility to make choices about things and determine truth the best we can. I think ultimately God's less concerned with our doctrine and that we have ascribed to these certain dogmas. The picture I see in the New Testament is not that picture. Now, it's not to say those things don't matter, but I think God cares more about like where your heart's at and whether you're sincere in seeking Him.
For whatever my opinion is worth, I completely agree. Maybe this is like a nice little way for us to end on a little note of agreement. Sometimes people will kind of hit me with like oh my gosh, why is the name escaping me? Like you should be religious even if you don't really think that it's true because of the gambit. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Pascal's wager. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Brain fart. But sometimes I'm hit with Pascal's wager and I'll respond with something to the effect of I have this intuition that if there was a God, he wouldn't be mad at me for what I'm doing. Like, you don't know my heart, obviously. Nobody does. I mean, frankly, even I don't know it. But I think that I'm being as honest as I can be. Like, I think that I'm approaching this as open-mindedly as I can. And, like, everybody has their biases and all that, But I just have this deep-seated intuition that, like, if there is a God, he doesn't care as much about the answer as he does about the process. And then the example that I always give is, so I went to engineering school. Engineering school is famous for having like tests that are 3 hours long. There's only 2 questions. And it's not about the answers. It's about the work. I had a test like that where I got both questions wrong, but I got like a B+ or an A- on that exam because I made tiny little like arithmetic errors, but my work was all mostly right. So I did fine on the exam, even though I got the only 2 questions wrong. And so I kind of think that my whole life could theoretically be like that exam. And then what kind of professor is God? Is he looking at me and saying like, well, Kevin, you were wrong. Actually, the Hindus were right this whole time. Straight to hell. My intuition says no, but again, that is just an intuition. But my intuition is enough that it lets me sleep at night, if that makes sense.
Well, I would rather hang out with atheists who are genuinely seeking the truth, or agnostics who are genuinely seeking the truth, than a group of religious people who are more concerned with like some sort of doctrine that they think that they fit under, and don't really care about where their heart is in relation to God. I think the Christian message, like you read in Romans, is like, pay attention to the tacos of life. If you think you're getting clues there, reach out to God, and then it's like he'll reach back, and that requires God to have to do something for this whole part of the equation to work.
Yeah, yeah. I can flip that exact same thing, and say that I would rather, and frankly, I do hang out with religious folks who are interested in having the conversation with me, rather than the edgy new atheist types who aren't really interested in having a conversation. They just want to, you know, be edgy and
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, it's
So
the dogma that God doesn't exist, and you
yeah,
need to support that at all costs.
yeah, that's actually a really good way of putting it. The edgy new atheist types and certain religious folks, they have the same amount of dogma. It's just kind of
Yep.
different kinds of dogma. I think that's really good. Um, if you wouldn't mind one more question, it's from David Ross. So I figure let's get that last question in there. How do you think original sin wounds and confuses our Christian ecclesiology?
I think that original sin, I don't think God is primarily concerned about Christopher Rice's Christian ecclesiology. I might be concerned about it. I might be trying to sort out which is the right church and all those things. Um, so I think original sin more wounds like how I interact with my family and my friends, and how I avoid seeking the truth because I'm scared, or all those sorts of like regular human things. Now, does it also affect how I view Christian ecclesiology? Sure, some. How do I how do I wipe that? How do I wipe my glasses clear of that? That's a good question. I'm trying to approach this as a Christian prayerfully, but then also to take a fresh look at the scriptures to see, what do I think they say? What do I think the story of the New Testament says? Like reading Lord of the Rings. If you got a new Tolkien book, you better believe you would read that and see, does that jive? Do I think this is Tolkien or not? So, and that's what I'm trying to do with the Catholic Church, is I've got the original story, and to see if the modern expression jives with that original story.
Obviously, as somebody who's not Catholic, um, take this for what it's worth. But I think that attitude is the exact right attitude to have. I think that the open mind, honestly searching for truth, is the best thing that you can do, and then kind of let the cards fall where they may. And I don't quite think of it in terms of like original sin, like confusing our ecclesiology, but I'll just say that just being human means you're not gonna entirely know what's going on all the time. You're gonna
Yeah.
be confused sometimes. That's just part of being a human. Um,
Yeah. And you shouldn't let someone else take your journey for you.
yes,
Like, I enjoy
yes,
engaging with people and learning from them, but like there's not a pope that's going to tell me where to go on my journey, or a YouTuber, or someone in a comment section, but I will listen and be humble and learn. But ultimately, like, I do need to make that journey for myself. So
yes, 100% agreed. And honestly, I think that's something that even like probably the vast majority of Catholics would even agree that you know take the journey for yourself. Now, where we all think the journey might end is going to be different, but in my opinion, that's way less important. The journey is what matters, not the destination.
that's right.
If I can end on one note, just first, I just want to say, CJ, this was an awesome discussion. Thank you so much for coming on my show, for staying 36 minutes longer than I said I would keep you for. But the questions kept coming, and I just want to take 1 second to brag. Trent Horn, Jimmy Aiken, Kyle Whittington, Eat Your Heart Out. I am officially one of the best Catholic apologists on YouTube. I don't know how it happened, but it did. The crowd has spoken. Your gooses are cooked. And GG. GG, but I don't know, get good. That's all I have to say. All right. Thanks again, CJ, for coming on. This was awesome.
Well, thank you.